Sending out a clear message after the Canadian Parliament has observed silence in the memory of the Khalistani terrorist Hardeep Singh Nijjar, eulogizing him. The Indian Consulate General in Vancouver has announced a memorial service to pay tribute to the 329 victims of the Kanishka bombing of Air India, the Kanishka flight that was the target of the Khalistani terrorists in 1985. In a very bold and clear message, the Indian High Commission to Vancouver has stated that India stands at the forefront of countering the menace of terrorism. It has added that the 1985 Kanishka bombing was a cowardly terror bombing and one of the most heinous terror-related air disasters in the history of civil aviation. Before we jump into this telecast, here's a look at the Canadian Parliament in that open and shameful support of a terrorist.
Colleagues, following discussions among representatives of all parties in the House, I understand that there is an agreement to observe a moment of silence in memory of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, assassinated in Surrey, British Columbia, 1 year ago today. I now invite honourable members to rise.
Now, that's completely reprehensible, shameful for the Canadian government to make a hero out of a terrorist. Hardeep Singh Nijjar was killed a year ago in the gang wars that happened, and Canada harboring terrorists, the Khalistanis, to the point that the Canadian government that has been installed is through the support of pro-Khalistani leaders and pro-Khalistani propagators. I'm going to start my conversation with Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor. Thank you for joining us, sir. And, a befitting response that has been given by the Government of India, where the Consulate General of the Vancouver Vancouver Consulate has stated in no unclear terms that there is going to be a memorial service that is going to be held on 23rd of June in memory of the 329 victims. Every single one of those victims was from a Sikh family. They had immigrated to Canada. They were Canadian citizens, and there was nothing that was done by the Canadian Court of Law, by the Canadian law and order agencies, or by the Canadian government to provide justice to the families, to put behind the terrorists in jails who were left scot-free to roam around freely on the streets of Canada.
Thank you very much, Megha. First of all, I have to thank the NewsX channel for, bringing attention to this issue and doing so much detailed analysis, study and research. That is absolutely phenomenal. It is one channel which has worked so hard to keep it on the front lines of people's thought attention. And I know so many people have been killed. It has been one of the most dastardly attacks of terrorism in the world, where an entire plane has been bombed out of the skies and all the passengers, the majority of them Canadian citizens, have been wiped off in one stroke. So all those families and their, all their relatives and friends have gone through a lot of trauma and suffering, which we have seen on your channel earlier also, on the discussions which you have organized earlier, which have been very commendable to give them a source for venting out their feelings also and expressing their opinions. Now, in my view, I think that this is an act which cannot be put aside. And how do we bring it into the mainstream, into the thoughts and actions and reactions of all the normal and positive thinking people of the world, all over the world, because it is not just one country which was impacted by this dastardly attack. So one of the most important things for us to do is to propose some sort of an international movement to create memorials in all the places where there are significant connections to that flight. For example, in Toronto, from where the flight took off, we have to have a memorial, and we have to propose to the Canadian government that we want this memorial in Canada. Let them say that they do not want it, then we can go all over town, go into the media and expose them that a terrorist attack which has happened on their soil, and they do not want a memorial for Canadian citizens who were killed in such large numbers. That will put them on the back foot. A similar memorial has to be proposed in Montreal, because Montreal was also a stop on this flight.
Yes.
Then a similar memorial has to be proposed in London, which was the next stop of the flight. The wordings have to be very clear in this memorial. Then it was in Delhi and Bombay you have to have these memorials, because Bombay was also the destination and Delhi is the capital of India. The wordings of the memorial has to clearly outline what happened in a very factual, professional manner. There have to be no distractions or emotions attached, because it has to be brought to the limelight that this is what happened and this is how it happened, and these were the people responsible, and this is what happened to the people who were responsible, that they were running scot-free for so many decades after that.
Yeah.
Absolutely being complicit with the Canadian government.
And we've covered it all. Like you rightfully mentioned, Ambassador, that we've done telecast after telecast. I think we must have done about 30-40 telecasts, and each of those telecasts, we went through the John Major report that had come out, which showcased the lapses, the glaring lapses of the CSIS, which is the intelligence agency of the Canadian government. We've spoken about the Royal Mounted Police, the Canadian Royal Mounted Police, and nothing that was done. There was buck passing that happened, or under the garb of buck passing, it was the support that was shown to the Khalistani terrorists. We've spoken about the Justice Parl report that showcased, you rightfully mentioned, those points in Montreal, and then the flight came to, and then it traveled to London, and how there were there were glaring, no checks and balances in place, no security in place, and we pointed out again and again. And this was never done in the history of Indian television. Such an in-depth analysis was done, and the idea was, the moot point was because this story has been buried under the carpet. It's people do not know about this. This is a revival, and unfortunately, the government of India has still not been able to drill it in the minds of the people, of the Canadians, of the Canadian government, that listen, this was a dastardly attack, this was a terror attack that happened, and you've done nothing to give any sort of solace or justice to the families.
Exactly. And also in Ireland, because a lot of the plane parts fell in the waters near Ireland. So a big memorial has to be created there also. And to put together a sort of a forum with all these families, which you have done already, but to engage more of them into a continuing sort of, effort. Like in the US, when there is such an attack where a lot of family members are killed, they file cases where the courts announce, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of reparations to be paid by the people who have conducted those sort of attacks. That will wipe out the funds of the Khalistani movement in Canada and globally once such a decision is arrived at.
Yeah.
So that will be the next step.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, very important.
The third step,
you spoke about.
Step will be,
I'll come back to you, sir. We'll speak about what are the steps that the government can take, and why have they not been taken so far? What has taken the government of India so long? Of course, there is a retaliatory action, and now better late than never. But a response that has become a very strong retort that has come to hammer home the point by the government of India. Sanjay Lazar is one of the family members of the Kanishka bombing victims. Thank you so much, Sanjay, once again for joining us on the telecast. And of course, the appeal that has been time and again repeatedly made by the family members that they desire to have justice and the cases have, case files have been closed. The perpetrators are roaming free. Some of them have died a natural death. There are others who are still roaming free. Nothing really has happened to them. What's your appeal to the government of India?
Thank you, Megha, for having me. First of all, I'd just like to clear a couple of points. Canada has built 4 memorials, and they are in Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal, Vancouver. I have visited all of them. We have the largest memorial in Ireland, built jointly by the Indian government, the Canadian government, and the Irish government. I am in Heathrow, London right now to speak at the Bantry Bay Municipal Hall, and I'm also going to the memorial. So I just wanted to clear that. We also have an organization of all the families called AIBFA. What is shocking for me, what is very shocking for me is, ironically, I'm on the way to Cork to visit my dead family. I lost my entire family there 39 years ago. And, 3 days literally before that, you have the Canadian government, Parliament eulogizing this man who is part of the Khalistan Tiger Force, which we know is a terrorist organization. On the one hand, Canada builds memorials and talks of anti-terror days, and on the other hand, they're doing this, which just blew me to bits. You also had the Khalistani, protesters outside the Indian embassy in Vancouver. Now, what have we done? Megha, I want to use your channel to raise this. Ambassador pointed out some good points. Let me tell you, I have lobbied from 1986 till 2023 for a memorial in India. Nobody has wanted to do it because of fear of upsetting the terrorists who are perpetrating threats in our country. They thought it was too sensitive. I have met 3 prime ministers over this. I have met over 30 ministers, including ministers in the PMO who came. For over 20 years, not a single minister has come to Cork, Ireland or Canada on any of the memorial days on June 23rd. Let me tell you, India has been hiding behind this, and I'm glad we have Mr. Jaishankar, who is our External Affairs Minister. I appeal to him, I've tweeted to him, and I've written to him today, that I appeal that India has to shed its kid gloves, come out and start letting it be known. Do you see the US forgetting 9/11? Do you see people forgetting Lockerbie? Do you see people, do we forget 26/11? Why are we shy to say that this was the worst act of aviation bombing in the history of mankind? It is a bombing. It's bigger than 9/11 in that sense. 9/11 wasn't a bomb.
Okay.
So I would like this, our government must take steps now so that this Khalistani menace is taken care of.
Okay. Daniel,
that's the most important thing.
I have with me a Canadian journalist who joins me on the telecast, Daniel Bodman. He's the senior correspondent for the National Telegraph. Daniel, what kind of I understand, the cases have been closed, the hearings have been, the judgments have been already made. It has been several decades now. This incident took place in 1983, 86, and it's and unfortunately, no justifiable action which could, give some sort of justice to the victims' families has been done. How difficult will it be to reopen these files and go through the lapses, the problems, and some kind of a tacit agreement that may most definitely have been had between the law and order agencies and the Khalistani terrorists that at that point of time were operating underground?
Yeah, I mean, we've kind of have reviewed a bit of the Air India bombing failures. I mean, the story of Canadian intelligence in the 1980s is one of cataclysmic failure and incompetence. Just not getting a translator to translate what was being said by the terrorists. They could have stopped the bombing had anyone really paid attention. And then, after the bombing, just the abysmal way it was handled when Sikhs who stepped up and tried to raise awareness, like Barraj Diol, were beaten by Khalistanis. The police, put in his police report that he was being uncooperative because he didn't see and he couldn't identify the masked men. They wore masks and beat him nearly to death, and then he didn't know who it was. So the police classified him as standoffish because he couldn't identify his attackers. When he was trying to lead the police to the actual perpetrators of the bombing, I mean, it's just that absurd. Fast forward 40 years. So whereas the 1980s, it was just massive incompetence and sort of a dismissive attitude, I guess, to the terrorism that didn't affect us, right? Khalistan, oh, Hindus, Sikhs, completely out of our mind in the 1980s. Fast forward to 2024, now there's more of a link between the Khalistani movement and the Canadian government, right? We have many people in the Liberal government and NDP, in the Conservatives as well, who are openly Khalistani aligned. The Khalistanis have had a massive financial and political push into our institutions because Canada has a first past the post system, and the way it's set up, the Khalistanis have been probably the most effective group at political infiltration over the last 4 decades, kind of set the pace. And wherever the Khalistanis infiltrate, the Muslim Brotherhood or the ISI or the CCP are always behind them. It's always linked together in this way. So we now have a very, very, very big problem in Canada.
Yeah, but how did it come to a head that the Khalistani movement and pro-Khalistanis are so entrenched in the very system, the ecosystem of Canada, not just the civilians I'm talking about, but also, the big money bags are the pro-Khalistani supporters. There is your government that is supported.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways to infiltrate in Canada. So it's actually very simple to infiltrate in Canada. If you give me $5 million and a bunch of crazy people, I can push any radical ideology into Canadian Parliament within a year. Here's how you do it. There's primaries to elect like the MPs, so the ministers of parliament, you Indians know this. So in the internal party selection, so if you're voting not Liberal versus Conservative versus NDP, but if you're voting for who's going to represent the Liberal Party in this potential riding, there's not a lot of votes in the voting in a potential riding for who's going to be the next Liberal representative MP. So if you are a radical Khalistani and you can stack an entire Gurdwara, right? You have someone funding it and you get an entire radical Gurdwara and you get one candidate there to be a Khalistani. You then go to the community, you bust these people in. And if you can just force with a few money and a couple hundred votes in a specific riding, you can then push your Khalistani candidate as to the representative Liberal Party. And if that riding is generally Liberal leaning, he'll win. Right? Take that out, represent NDP or Conservative Party, do the same thing, replace Khalistani with Muslim Brotherhood or CCP. And this is how you politically infiltrate in Canada. We've had this been going on for years, and Canadians don't want to have uncomfortable conversations. We want to ignore this all and pretend it's not happening. Now we're starting to face the consequences of all of this happening. We have at least 8 members of parliament who are guilty of treason and cooperating with foreign governments. According to a new intelligence report, Justin Trudeau won't release the names, probably because some of them have served in his cabinet. And this is the way it's gone. And listen, this is par for the course for Justin Trudeau.
Okay.
For a Canadian Parliament to praise a terrorist, moment of silence in 2024 is perfectly on brand. It tracks with everything we've seen in the last 10 years. It's not the first terrorist he's admired. You go back to Omar Khadr and him awarding him $10.5 million, not even want to fund him in court, just giving a terrorist $10.5 million. He got a thank you note from Hamas, after October 7th. This is a Canadian government under Justin Trudeau that is consistently and prolifically supporting terrorism.
Dean Baxendale, how do you view this when there is a moment of silence, when he's eulogizing a man who is a terrorist who has been designated by India? There are red corner notices that have been issued time and again. There have been a number of demands that have been made of the Canadian government by the government of India that he needs to be extradited, that there needs to be a rule of law to ensure that he's extradited and then prosecuted for the terror crimes that he has committed. And there you have Justin Trudeau and his government and all the parliamentarians going about making a hero out of him.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on today. And, I'll make my comments brief. I echo my colleagues' comments with respect to the infiltration, how easy it is here in Canada and has been for the better part of 30 plus years in terms of the infiltration by various diaspora groups or diaspora groups inside our country and all democracies. I think with respect to this issue, I think it's deplorable that ultimately, in Parliament, we recognizing this individual in that way. It doesn't take away from the fact that, there may have been involvement of the Indian government with respect to dealing with this particular situation, because the Canadian government and our politicians for many years have coveted diaspora votes, either be from the Sikh or Hindu communities or within the China diaspora and others, over good governance and supporting the values of a democracy. So we are seeing that play out every day here in Canada. And certainly Justin Trudeau does not want to release it. And yes, there are ministers in that list group, and that is vast and wide. And I think we're only touching on the election interference and community. But this is unfortunately a deplorable act, on behalf of the government. And as I say, coveting diaspora groups in this way for votes is not the way to run a democracy. So.
Right. But, can there be some sort of a parallel drawn when in 1984 the Kanishka bombing took place and the terrorists were, they were recused of all sorts of crimes that they had committed, the terror bombing that took place, and once again after four decades you have another prime minister of your country going about eulogizing, making a hero out of a terrorist.
Indeed, and unfortunately, with the support of the NDP, which ultimately is the alliance that is propping up that minority government right now, the government should have fallen on a number of different issues over the last couple of years. But that alliance obviously is very strong, and we know Jagmeet Singh's position with respect to the Khalistani state, et cetera. So this is politics playing out in Canada on a global stage, and unfortunately, it affects our relationship with what should be a strong partnership between democracies of India and Canada. So that's all I have to say on the subject right now. And thank you so much for having me on. As I'm at an event here in Canada, so I'm going to sign off in a moment. So thank you very much, though, for having me on the show today.
Thank you, Dean, for joining us. I'm going to bring Sumit Peer into the discussion as well. And Sumit, while there has been a statement that has been made by the Consulate General in Vancouver, do you think it's too little too late and a little tepid a response with regards to what happened in the Canadian Parliament?
Megha ji, thank you for having me on your show. What we are seeing today is what the world has not seen before. We have seen an democratically elected government supporting terrorists on the floor of Parliament. Hardeep Singh Nijjar, a so-called plumber, holding a AK-47, going to Pakistan for training, running camps in Canada, and the Canadian Parliament is standing up and saying we want to offer 1 minute of silence to it. It is legitimizing terror. Canada is the only country, what Daniel rightly said, wherein these terrorists have infiltrated the government. This is the point I've been making for the last few years. They've infiltrated the government. Now they're controlling the government. They're deciding its policies. They're deciding its international policy. The foreign policy of Canada is today decided by Jagmeet Singh and his Khalistani ideas. You can see this is where Canada has gone. Today, they can literally make Theodore do whatever they want to do. If they want him to make a somersault, he will do a somersault tomorrow morning. That is what is happening there. Now, the point of CCP and others infiltrating. Look, Canada has become a playground for MSS. Canada has become a playground for ISI. What happened to that Baloch girl who was killed in Canada? Do you find anybody? What happened to those two pro-India Sikh leaders which were eliminated in Canada? Did anybody find anybody? Was anybody arrested? Is any closure to those cases? Absolutely not. People in Canada, Chinese and Pakistanis, and people from ISIS and Muslim Brotherhood, they can act on will. They can pick up and choose a target, and they know in this country they will get full political patronage. After an accident or a terrorism act wherein 86 kids were eliminated, 86 bache were eliminated, now they have done nothing around that, and the Indian consulate is now saying we want to have a memorial, we want to talk about it, let's bring it to the World Forum. This is the minimum we could do, because let's not forget that 90% of the people who got killed were foreigners, and most of them were Canadians. This is a country where the Canadian government is not bothered about
Canadians. I think almost all of them were Sikhs. They were Indian origin Sikhs who had the citizenship of Canada. That's the truth.
I want to make a point.
That's the truth. And had there been Canadians, native Canadians who had died in this accident, this terror attack, all hell would have broken loose.
Megha ji, the point here is when you have 90% of the Canadians killed, logically they're Canadians. Sikhs or no Sikhs, they're Canadians. You have a government who is letting 300 Sikhs die and go into the well. I'm not bothered. Now I have a Sikh here who is again a Sikh, who is a terrorist carrying AK-47, allegedly a plumber. For them, I want to have silence in the parliament. I want to make him a hero. I want to have a memorial for him. This talks about how compromised the Canadian government has become. This talks about how compromised the Canadian parliament is today. It is literally run by Khalistanis. It's a sorry state of affairs. And rather than being best friends with India, as we are we are thriving and living democracies, they are trying to cut acts with us. They are trying to accuse us. They are trying to cast all aspersions against us. And yet, after a year, let me remind them, where is an iota of evidence? There is not a shred of evidence to claim their hypothesis. But they are so much compelled by the politics of the day that they have to even go and burn their bridges with a country like India. What kind of a democracy is this, and what kind of a government is this?
Yeah, but the question, Sumit, the question is why has the United States of America, why has United Kingdom not made a peep about this very shocking, alarming, moment that has happened?
You see, there are, it's an unfortunate part, Meghaji. As long as I didn't want to bring race into it, but now I have to. As long as these people are killed, what you rightly said were Sikhs of Indian origin, it is not a big deal, right? It's okay. They got killed, theek hai. But if they were Caucasians, it will be a different tenor and tenure. There'll be a different level of noise movement because they know there's Indian origin. Sikhs, it doesn't matter. Didn't Justin Trudeau declare when there was a farmer protest and emergency, didn't he confiscate trucks? Didn't he bring the cavalry? Didn't he seize the bank accounts? He said these people are all traitors. They're anti-nationals. The people who have given their sweat and blood to make Canada, now they say they're all anti-nationals. It is choice. It is the politics of choice. When it comes, you become very close to the Sikhs of Canada so that you can use them as vote banks. And when it doesn't suit your interest, they become traitors. You freeze their accounts, you quarantine the cavalry, you freeze their trucks and say, look, they are the biggest national security threat. Where was Jagmeet Singh when all this was done? He was in hibernation somewhere because he is a political Sardar. He is not a real Sikh, ma'am. If he's a real Sikh, he will not behave like this. He's a political Sardar. He wears his identity for political gains, not for religious gains. From his heart and mind, he's a goddamn opportunist politician. He just cares about his faida and his gains. This all is a getter for him. Sorry to use a word like this. He's not a Sikh by heart and mind. If he was, he would have not behaved like this.
Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor, again, I have to draw these parallels. Whether it is Gurpatwant Singh Pannu, who is again a designated terrorist, there have been a number of demands and requests that have been made by the Indian government to the US authorities to extradite him. Something similar that happened for Hardeep Singh Nijjar. But why don't we get favorable responses from these North American countries?
Thank you, Megha. I will come to that very shortly. But I just wanted to also delve a little bit deeper into what Sanjay Lazar said earlier. He mentioned firstly that there are 4 places in Canada and some places in Ireland which are memorials. Now, most of us do not know about it. How do we bring it into the attention of the people all over the world? That is an important aspect. How do we create a global sort of, movement that June 23rd is observed in memory of these people? We propose resolutions in the UN. We propose resolutions in Indian Parliament. We propose resolutions in the Canadian Parliament. Some Canadian MPs have to also propose 2 minutes of silence in honor of all those who were killed on June 23rd, 1985, and let the government deny that. So people like Sanjay need a lot of support from all of us so that all these events can happen continuously every June 23rd, every year, so that this issue is brought in the forefront of everybody's attention. Now, about Patwant Singh Pannu, it is again very, very shameful because once you have given such threats openly about bombing planes, about killing diplomats, about killing leaders of India, and those are videos. Now, anybody says that about any leader in the US, about Biden or Trudeau or anybody, is prosecuted immediately. Now, for this chap to be going scot-free and being not just going scot-free, but given protection and given information that please take care of yourself, etc., etc.
Yeah.
And this is the height of, shame and tragedy for any country to support terrorists to this extent instead of hauling them into the places where they need to be. So I'll stop here, Megha, but this is something once India becomes more important globally, it is already on that path, and that day is not very far off when they will have to listen to what India says and react to what India says and act on what India proposes. So that day will also come. But till then, the people of India, the diaspora, for example, which is very, very prominent in the US, for example, over 5 million Indian diaspora. Now, they have to also take on some ownership and some responsibilities in these issues and demand from their government that what are you doing? Supporting a known terrorist like Panun, who needs to be behind bars. So there are a lot of them in the administration also, inside the government, and they also have to raise these issues continuously on their own initiative.
Okay.
Because these are very serious matters for US, for Canada, and for the world.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Daniel Bodman, we have seen that media largely has been in favor of, when we talk about the CBC report that had come out. And that was where this entire ruckus started off, because that there was unsubstantiated claims that had been made in that report, saying that it was the intelligence officers of the government of India sitting out of the High Commission in Ottawa that had directed the assassination of Hardeep Nijjar. And thereby came that statement of Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister, in the Parliament. And of course, there was this escalation of tensions between India and downgrading of our relationship with each other, diplomatically and otherwise. What is, in your sense, the larger media in Canada seeing these developments? How do they react? And I would just like to understand, do they see the truth in it all?
Short answer to that is probably not. And there's a big problem with Canadian media under Trudeau, especially. So Trudeau basically tried to monopolize the media by buying it originally for $600 million. Sorry, bailing it out. And the Canadian media, corporate media, was going to be government funded by Trudeau to, in his words, quote, preserve the independence of Canadian media by putting it under government control. This is the man we're dealing with. Now, with the CBC, it's even worse. So the CBC is Canadian. It's a Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. It's our version of the BBC. It gets over $1 billion a year from the Canadian government. And it's, very hardline left. But the problems with the CBC, on stories with the government is even worse. So you're talking about the CBC coming out with the report. And listen, we can make the arguments of, okay, was Nijjar taken out? Is it a Khalistani gang war? Did the Indian government put their finger on a Khalistani gang war? We can have this debate. But the CBC is not a neutral arbiter and cannot be trusted in anything at this level. For example, the Freedom Convoy, which was referenced, which was a trucker protest, the CBC tried to claim that it was sponsored by Russia and Vladimir Putin, which was very hilarious. But the more nefarious thing, as we actually did find out, is the government would sort of leak nonsense about potential terrorism concerns of the Freedom Convoy to the CBC. The CBC would then report fake things of here's potential terrorism in the Freedom Convoy. The RCMP, people connected to that, would then use that CBC article of potential problems in the Freedom Convoy terrorism to put out a report that, there's potential problems. Then the CBC would come and say, look, the government intelligence agencies now say there's potential terrorism threats. But if you ever see the meme of the extension cord plugged into itself, this is Canadian media and the government, right? So the CBC will sort of take, if the government wants to leak a narrative, they'll leak it to the CBC with no evidence. The CBC will write an article that will then be evidence that the intelligence agencies will be looking into. And now we have a story about the intelligence agencies looking into something. It must be real. But it was completely created by the Trudeau government. And this is how you can sort of manufacture news.
Right. But, then it got substantiated. And I don't know how much truth there is to it. And there are speculations, right? And it's definitely being rejected by India forthrightly. When the Five Eyes report came, and they sort of got involved in this, and these Five Eyes include the United States of America and UK and Canada as well. then how do we tackle such a situation which has gotten the stamp of the intelligence agencies of all these top countries?
I mean, like this is a diplomatic problem that we're all flubbing, especially in Canada. And the real story here for the Canadian purpose is not like, did India kill Hardeep Singh Nijjar? It's who is he? Because the Canadian government, if we want to stand under principle that we will defend every Canadian no matter what because they are Canadian and these are our people, okay, fine. That's an interesting principle to set, and we can talk about that. My problem has been that's not a principle this government has applied. It didn't apply, as someone rightly brought up, to Kareem Baloch, who was murdered by the ISI. It didn't apply to my friend Mehdi Amin, who was murdered by the IRGC here, both hostile foreign agencies. Their deaths were completely fine. No one cared. It only applies to Hardeep Singh Nijjar. So it'd be one thing as Canadian if we wanted to say, you know what, he is a Canadian no matter what. We're going to find out who murdered him on our soil because that's the important thing. Okay, fine. That's an interesting principle. But this breaks another step where not only is this just the principle of any Canadian is Canadian. No. We need a moment of silence. This is the most important Canadian. We are elevating the life of the leader of the Khalistan Tiger Force, which I hope you put a graphic up of their logo because there's a giant lion in the center. Like, these are the people that are running our country. They're idiots.
Yeah.
They don't know the difference between a lion and a tiger, but they do know they want to blow things up. And these are the people that we have a moment of silence for. These are our valued Canadians. And
it could not be highlighted more and very well perceived and articulated over there, Daniel. And I'm going to come back to Sumit. So Sumit, important points that have also been raised by Ambassador Pradeep about why has thus far not a moment of silence been observed by the Canadian Parliament. It's been 4 decades. There were 329 lives lost, and it has been acknowledged that by the Canadian Prime Ministers in the past that it was an error of judgment, it was a shameful act that happened, and it happened with the terrorists that were harbored inside Canada. So why no action for the innocent Sikhs that died, and why such an action for somebody like you said, who's wielding a gun? He's a terror suspect. According to the Canadian authorities, we have definite proof that Nijjar was a terrorist, and that's why those extradition treaties that we wanted to sign, extradition demands that we were making. So why the contrast, and why is the world not being able to see this? You can't say that the world is stupid. You cannot say that the people of Canada cannot distinguish between the black and white that is happening. So why is there a complete silence on this kind of travesty that is taking place today in Canada?
Ma'am, the problem is very simple. Where are you going to get your next vote from? Where are you going to get your next MPs from? Who can win you? Who can make you win an election? Who can give you raise funds for you? It's very simple that. Because these Khalistanis, because they live in ghettos, there are a lot of ghettos. And when they live in ghettos, the ghettos determine the voting pattern. So if you can want MPs to be selected, okay, these are the people. If you want money to be raised, these are the people. If you want funding to be raised from elsewhere in the world, these are the people. These are the people who can buy you influence, and these people put together along with Jagmeet Singh can make your government stand. So you choose your friends and partners based on the need. It is not you have affinity for anybody and everybody.
But so why is the average Canadian not anxious about it, not perturbed about it?
The problem is the system is like that. You let the ghettos to be, there's a problem in the Canada where you can let ghettos to, crop up. Today, who is controlling the Canadian real estate? Canadian real estate is all controlled by Chinese. It's a reality of life. Are Canadians trying to get back their real estate? No, it's controlled by Chinese, whichever way you look at it. Where are all the Pakistani generals settling, by the way, after retirement, after all the hush-hush money they get, after all the loot they do in Pakistan? They settle in Canada. Where are these warlords settling in the world? Where are these drug lords settling in the world? They're all settling in Canada. And the problem is, even with Pakistani army people and all, Meghaji, there are ghettos. They live in very small, close ghettos. So ghettos gives them community gives them strength gives them entry into primaries. The moment you have entry into primaries, you can climb up the political ladder. A few primaries put together can make an MP. It's a very simple thing. They have the money, they have the influence, they have the contacts. And unfortunately, the government of the day, which should have resigned rather than running a government like this, Justin Trudeau, he's walking with them. I want to raise another point about Pannu. If you talk about Pannu today, I have to be very, very clearly talking about one thing. Pannu is an asset of CIA and Pannu is an asset of Canadian intelligence. How can this man who has not practiced law for last 20, 15 years, how can he alter between Canada and America conveniently? No questions asked. Nobody is touching it. What has Pannu done? He has threatened my prime minister. He has threatened my external affairs minister. He has threatened our diplomats. He has taken posters out that we are going to do. So he is saying, okay, don't go into a plane that you will blow me and my family. Not literally me, that any of us. With those kind of terror threats, how can a person go freely in America and Canada and nobody knows where Pannu is? What kind of a joke is this? Americans believe they have the right to go and eliminate Qasem Soleimani because they presume and believe he's a national security threat. Okay, given he's a national security threat. But here you have a man on your soil who is threatening the leader of the biggest democracy of the world with dire consequences, who is threatening a 1.4 billion nation, who is threatening our external affairs minister and our diplomats, and yet nobody can find him. It is basically Game of Thrones which is being played. It's a game of pinprick diplomacy.
Ambassador Kapoor, would you like to react to this? Particularly, there may be very close ties between, or it may be perceived as close ties between India and United States of America, or India or United Kingdom, or any of the European nations. But when it comes to their people, when it comes to the North American region or European region, they are all hand in glove. And it serves their purpose to have a Pannu in their backyard and feign ignorance about where his whereabouts are.
Yes, thank you for asking that question. I think the current leadership in India and the government which is in India has been more proactive than what our earlier governments used to be on the international scene. And the respect that they command on international fora is very much more than what was earlier the case. So, and that is increasing by the day. Now, for them to sort of then demand, even Sanjay also mentioned another point that for 30 years he has been chasing up with the government of India for having memorials erected in India in honor of those victims, and that has not yet happened. Now, that is one thing which the BJP-led government has to give serious attention to. I don't know what sort of difficulties he has faced with the current leadership, but for 10 years, if he has not been able to succeed, it requires some correction immediately. And memorial services have to be proposed, as I said earlier, not just in the Canadian Parliament, but also in the Indian Parliament, in the UN and everywhere. And people like Pannu, you have to have continuous follow-up. Like earlier, when we had to designate some people as terrorists, Masood Azhar, for example, in the UN, there would be very great difficulties. But we persisted and persisted and persisted till others fell in line and then agreed to designate that person as a terrorist. Now, similarly for Pannu, similar effort has to be made with continuous, we have a system in diplomacy which is called note verbal, where the embassy of any country and the host country can give a sort of a démarche to the local government, saying that we demand that Pannu be arrested because of on these grounds, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. Those sort of notes have to be issued by the Embassy of India in Washington, D.C., by the High Commission of India in Canada, by the consulates of India in all these towns where he lives, continuously demanding that he be arrested and prosecuted. So once you send a note verbal to the local government, it is incumbent upon the local government to send you a reply. In that reply, let them state that these are the reasons that we are not prosecuting him. It becomes very embarrassing.
Yeah, fair enough.
So
and there has to be, the effort has been to be continuous, and it has to be drilled into the heads, hammered home. And like you said, the example of how in Kashmir peace has been ensured. Now there is never a question about the United Nations or any international organization questioning even whether Kashmir is an integral part of India. But also, a big question arises, and which is unfortunate, that why has the government of India or the External Affairs Ministry still not released a statement over the event that has taken place today in the Canadian Parliament?
I think Sanjay Lazar may be in a better position to answer that. I have not sort of really heard anything about that in this regard. But for this government to do something along these lines should not have been very difficult. And if the consulate in Vancouver, the Consul General in Vancouver has issued this aspect of note about memorial services in Vancouver, it cannot have been done without the clearance from the Ministry of External Affairs. So
I
in
think
my
a sterner
opinion, that
message,
already
a
marks
sterner
the
message could have been given. This is too tepid, not in as befitting a response to this event that has taken place. You're
yeah,
eulogizing
but it
a
is not.
terrorist.
It is not a question of too little, too late. It is a question of a start to a much bigger
Okay.
action which need to be taken.
Okay.
So it's a beginning start. That means the policy has changed. That means now it will become a lot easier for more steps to be taken in this regard.
Okay.
So I would look
Let's
at it
hope.
that way.
Let's hope that happens. Sanjay Lazar, what is it that you seek from the government of India to the campaign that you are driving home in different parts of the world, holding these seminars and conferences and making people aware of what happened when your family member ended up losing his life because of that drastic, that dastardly attack that took place? What effort do you seek from the government?
Megha, I just want to point out before I answer them, 2 or 3 things. One is, not all the 329 passengers were Sikhs. There were hardly about 38 of them. That is because prior to the bombing, there was advance notice given in all the gurdwaras across Canada, Air India ki flight mat le. Okay, number 1. Number 2, out of the 329 who died on the Kanishka, 226 were Canadian, Indians of Canadian origin. And I remember going on the Canadian TV about 25, 30 years ago and saying, had these been a plane full of white people, it would have been solved in the first week. And it took 20 years to do that. I said it to Terry on CBC. I said it to so many people at that time. The third thing is, Ambassador pointed out how we can bring out, more awareness about the memorials. I'd like to say, Prime Minister Modi was the first person to ever visit a Kanishka memorial in Ottawa when he went in 2014-15 for a state visit. What we need is, it's very clear, we need to educate our own people. We talk of Canadians having forgotten this tragedy. Indians have forgotten this tragedy. If you don't have a memorial, you don't know what you're looking at. People remember Jallianwala Bagh or, all the other criminal, sad tragedies that have happened in our country because you have a memorial. You go there, you pray there, you inspired there. Now, what I would dearly look forward is, having my minister or my government or even the head of my state visiting. I remember on the 20th anniversary, Daniel might remember, we had, I had somebody from the Indian Prime Minister's office, a minister, minister in the PMO. We had the President of Canada, Prime Minister of Canada, the President of Ireland, the leader of the opposition of Canada. Everybody came. Next year is the 40th year. I hope that we have a memorial in Delhi by then. Take some parts of the aircraft, put it there, make it an anti-terrorism memorial. Like Canada allegedly celebrates or commemorates June 23rd as Anti-Terrorism Day, and yet they glorify Nijjar, 5 days before that. I hope, India can do something, and I'm confident that, Prime Minister Modi and Dr. Jaishankar will, because they've got that, they're more dashing than most other governments I've seen in the last 3 decades.
All right.
Yeah.
Sumit, now on the larger, the larger picture is that India's sovereignty is under threat. When you have these Khalistani elements that have completely taken over the Canadian government, there in fact have been reports where the ABC, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, has come out with this report. There's a documentary that has been published, and there have again been, a toolkit that has been created, that has been repeated by the Canadian agency, this media, the Australian media agency, where the exact same accusations have been made, that there are a few Indian intelligence officials who are targeting Sikh diaspora for their support for the pro-Khalistani elements in Australia. Thankfully, no heed has been paid by the government, by the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese. There is only, I think, a fringe member of Parliament who is an extremist and anti-India and anti-Hindu persona, a spokesperson of who has gone about supporting this and said that action will be taken against these officers. So we have seen in United Kingdom, in United States of America, there are a number of these attacks that have taken place. Our consulates and our high commissions have been attacked, and our embassies have been desecrated. How do we tackle this situation? Because it is very swiftly going out of hand.
Meghaji, it's a very simple thing. Look, when you are growing and you have hostile neighbors on your right and left, let's not forget there's something called as a K2 desk. K for Kashmir, K for Khalistan, that is active, running and funded by ISI. There are few hundred people which work every day for a living to ferment trouble for India. That is the reality you and me live with. So these people are going to act, when they are not able to act in India, they will go to Australia, they will go to UK, they will go to United States, they will go to Canada. Tomorrow they might even go to Mexico or a Chile or a Paraguay. You might see something coming from Paraguay. Let's not be surprised, because that is where they will ultimately end up in. It is, the onus is on our diplomacy. I have utmost faith in Dr. Jaishankar, and I will be waiting for the statement which is typical Dr. Jaishankar, which will happen in one international forum, and he will, he will literally blow them to smithereens, all this propaganda, and he will be directly calling out the names, what he has done before. That is the way, that aggressive diplomacy is the answer to that. Our diaspora is to fight it. You and me on the media, we are already fighting it every day. We have to fight it. And I believe, this is my personal opinion, I don't represent government, I have nothing to do with the government of India. I believe that we as Indians have every right to protect ourselves. We are not stink ducks. We cannot wait somebody to come and plant a bomb in my aircraft and 300 of us die. We cannot plant a bomb in a ship and 5,000 of us die. You cannot derail a train and 2,000 of us die. No, we are not stink ducks. If everybody has a right to live, breathe and have a nice and happy life, I believe we Indians, 1.4 billion Indians, also empower our government and also ask from our government, sir, kindly do whatever you have to do to protect our lives. When it comes to international things, all the options are open, everything is open. There is nothing which can be called out, and you cannot bully a country and a nation of 1.4 billion people. That has to go clear. 5 eyes, 7 eyes, 9 eyes, 21 eyes. Jitni bhi eyes hai, how many eyes are there? This has to go very clear. We know how to protect our interests. Push comes to shove, we are not stink ducks. That is the message, clear and ample. I can't be more direct. Let people interpret it the way they want. Okay. My message is very clear.
Okay. Daniel, a closing comment from you. How do you see the state of affairs of Canada when your politics is so deeply entrenched in the Khalistani secessionist movement? It is a fear for our country, it is dangerous for the sovereignty of our country, but how does this reflect on the Canadian government?
Reflects very poorly. And the next year of Canadian politics, year plus into the next election, will be one that will have heavy influence from a bunch of bad foreign actors. This is the #1 story in Canada. The Liberal government, who has, again, bought the media and is entered into a Faustian bargain with Jagmeet Singh and the NDP. They've done it to sort of create stability, but it's been at the cost of their own party. It's been at the cost of the Canadian people. It's been at the cost of the integrity of the Canadian media. It's been at the cost of the integrity of the Canadian political system. And I expect over the next year, you will see more mass migration from countries that import values of Islamism, Khalistani radicalism, CCP, radical communist ideology. This is, import votes and fast track them to get them into your party. That will be probably what they'll do over the next year. You will see more support of Hardip Singh Nijjar, more support of the Khalistan Tiger Force. If we learned anything from Justin Trudeau and Jagmeet Singh, it's that when what they do starts to really affect Canadians and hurt them, the answer is always double down, deny in the media, and get some shill in the CBC or Toronto Star or somewhere else to write an op-ed that anyone criticizing them is racist or regressive or doesn't really understand geopolitics in the way that the Toronto Star does, and then an article that is 80% fiction, 20% misleading. That's what you're going to get. More of Trudeau's Canada. It's going to be doubling down. It's going to be worse. It's going to be Khalistan, CCP, Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas to the max.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel. Hit the bell icon.